Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, it's another shot in the turf wars. The San Diego lawmaker who is trying to protect homeowners who want to replace thirsty lawns.
I'm offended by this characterization. It's hurtful to my spouse, to my family, and to my supporters, and I want it to stop.
And I'm Peggy Pico. San Diego County Supervisor Dave Roberts joins me for a one-on-one interview about allegations of misconduct by former staff members. Plus, San Diego nurses show us what it really was like to treat thousands of earthquake survivors in Nepal and share lessons for earthquake preparedness here.
Como dices tú, ellos esperaban a su papá. Y mi papá le dije, su papá ya no va a regresar. Yo le decía, tu papá está en el cielo, mira.
Still fighting for justice 5 years after a violent confrontation turned deadly in San Ysidro. The changes at the border after cell phone video caught the fight. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Whether it's fighting over hotel taxes, waterfront development, or a new Walmart, many San Diegans are probably familiar with the name Cory Briggs. Our media partner, iNewsSource, has spent several months reporting on Briggs and even published an in-depth look at the attorney's network of clients. iNewsSource reporter Brad Racino is here to tell us what it all means. Brad, how did we get here? Why investigate a lawyer?
Briggs is a big name here in town. He's someone who's sort of ingrained in the fabric of San Diego politics, and he got that way through his use of the court system. But what we found interesting is that his clients are almost entirely nonprofits.
And you describe these nonprofits as part of a larger network. What do you mean by that?
By network, we're referring to a collection of more than 30 nonprofits either Briggs or his family helped form. They all share a number of characteristics that we detail in the story, but the point is that when the groups win or settle, typically Briggs's firm collects the attorney's fees and the settlements. And more often than not, after the nonprofit is finished up in court, it's eventually suspended by either the state or federal government for failing to file required disclosures. We found that over the years, this network has repeatedly and persistently violated state and federal laws related to charities.
And we saw that long list of those charities. How does San Diegans for Open Government fit into this?
That nonprofit is one of Briggs's most frequent clients and is probably the one most people have at least heard about. It's governed by Briggs's friends and his cousin, who taken together sit on the boards of at least 16 Briggs-associated nonprofits. From court depositions, we learned that Briggs and his firm basically control the group and pay for everything related to it. They control its social media, pay for its court costs, and collect all settlements and judgments when the group wins in court. We had two nonprofit experts tell us that all the money San Diegans for Open Government is winning in court and paying to Briggs for attorney's fees really should be being disclosed to the government, but that's not happening.
Speaking of money, tell us a little bit about the other nonprofit you profiled, the Southwest Center on Renewable Energy.
That's a really interesting one. It's governed by three people: Briggs's cousin, Karen Langwasser, his wife, partner, Srichia Cacciatore, and by Bill Powers, a renewable energy advocate. Its mission is to educate the public about renewable energy. But despite claiming to have raised and spent more than $1 million over the years, the only place we found this organization exists is on paper. We also found the Southwest Center spent or lost, we don't know, nearly $250,000 with no explanation where it went. It just disappeared from one year's filings to the next. A forensic accountant told us the filings were egregiously wrong. The nonprofit's books are in care of Cory Briggs, and Langwasser, Briggs's cousin, is the chief financial officer for the organization.
And Brad, what did Briggs have to say about all this?
He wouldn't speak to us or answer any questions. Neither would Karen Langwasser, Srichia Cacciatore, Bill Powers, or Richard Lawrence, who sits on the boards of 10 of these groups.
iNewsSource reporter Brad Racino. You can see the story, hear what experts had to say about it, and see the entire network mapped out at iNewsSource.org. More than 2 years after a judge threw out a controversial makeover plan for the middle of Balboa Park, an appeals court says the Plaza de Panama project can go forward. An historic group opposed the plan, saying it would damage the park's buildings, including the Cabrillo Bridge. Parking was eventually removed from the plaza without changing the bridge. City Attorney Jan Goldsmith says the new ruling may be a hollow victory because of the 2-year delay. Cleaner water is on the horizon with a new rule passed by President Obama to reduce pollution in rivers, lakes, and streams across the country. Environmental experts say the mandate would apply to approximately 66% of California's rivers, lakes, and streams and require farmers and business owners to get permits before they discharge pollutants into bodies of water already under federal protection. Supporters say it would provide more clean water during the drought. Farmers are critical of the new regulation. They say permits will make it hard to do their job. Get the Grass Out, a bill to prevent California homeowner associations from banning artificial turf, is moving forward. 2 similar measures to replace lawns with fake grass failed. Today, the state assembly passed the bill sponsored by San Diego Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. She says it's needed because of California's ongoing drought. The bill now heads to the Senate. It would take effect immediately if signed into law. State lawmakers are rolling out a rebate program to help low-income families afford hybrid or electric cars. Specifically, families living in highly polluted areas. Those who qualify can get up to $12,000 in rebates. Cars must meet low emission standards. It's part of a statewide effort to move Californians beyond oil and transition to cars with lower emissions. He's accused of misusing public funds, creating a hostile work environment, and having an inappropriate relationship with an employee. County Supervisor Dave Roberts talks with Peggy Pico tonight about allegations made by 2 former staffers.
When elected in 2012, County Supervisor Dave Roberts became the first Democrat on the board in more than 20 years. Roberts is married, the father of 5 adopted children, and is widely recognized for his adoption reform work in San Diego County. But in the last year, 7 of his staff members have quit, including his chief of staff and office manager, who filed claims against Roberts. Joining me is San Diego County Supervisor Dave Roberts. And Dave, these claim allegations state that your staff worked on campaign business while on the clock for the county. Your former office manager, Diane Porter, her attorney released an email where you asked Porter to fix and print a series of letters asking for campaign endorsements and also book a fundraising event. She says all on county time. Did you direct the staff to do these things?
I hold my staff and myself to the highest ethical standards. I never ask them to work on political business on county time. And let's make sure we're clear for your viewers. I've been in office 2.5 years. My first 2 years under an experienced chief of staff, I had little turnover in the office and smooth operations. Glennis Vaughn was hired and officially became my chief of staff on January 7th of this year, and since then I have had 8 staff, including herself, leave. 2 for personal reasons, 3 because they were part of her reorganization of the office. She wasn't satisfied with anybody in the office. And then 3 have recently resigned, 2 filing these claims against the County of San Diego.
And as far as those emails go, were the emails sent and they just weren't on county time, or what do you know about those emails? So in elected life, sometimes government workers want to volunteer to make sure their boss is in office or stays in office. And in this case, if you look at the claim, they show 7 emails. 6 went from my personal address to Diane Porter's personal address. She was a volunteer who volunteered to be on my campaign to help out. The last email went to the wrong address. People tell me that's called autofill when you have the same person under multiple addresses. Out of tens of thousands of emails, this is the only email they can find that went to this wrong address. Both Porter and your chief of staff, Glennis Vaughn, claim that you have had inappropriate relationship with your chauffeur, Harold Meza. What was your relationship?
Let me tell you the facts. The county does not have a position description for a driver or a chauffeur. He was a community relations representative for me. I have 10 of them in my office. Harold Meza was an intern in our office while he was in college for 11 months unpaid. When he graduated from Cal State San Marcos at the top of his class, he was offered the position by my former chief of staff, John Weil. He accepted and he has excelled at his job. Let me categorically deny that I ever had an inappropriate relationship with him or anybody. And it's interesting today, they're now saying, well, we didn't mean really a sexual relationship, just it was inappropriate. Well, what does that mean? And I know I'm offended by this characterization. It's hurtful to my spouse, to my family, and to my supporters, and I want it to stop.
Sure, I knew what was said was they questioned whether you ever shared a hotel room with him. Did you?
I have never shared a hotel room with Harold Meza. We did on one trip where he accompanied me on a California Water Authority trip. When we got to the facility that night in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, they have military-style worker barracks. And they said because so many people came on this trip, they had to put us up 2 per room, men with men and women with women. And they said they would try to assign people that knew each other. So he was assigned in my room. I've been on this trip 3 times. It was the first time I had had a roommate. I was surprised, but what could you do? You're in the middle of nowhere. There's no other options. He has sworn a declaration under oath that nothing happened. So why this continues, people saying this, it's just baffling.
Does he still work for you?
Yes, he still works for me, and he's doing a great job, as all my staff is. People have this impression that my office is in turmoil. I have hired another seasoned professional, Mel Milstein. He took over about 6 weeks ago, the day after my former chief of staff resigned, doing a great job. We have all but one of our positions filled. The office staff is angry that people are mischaracterizing our office.
I want to ask you about that. 7 of 11 staff members in a year seems alarming, including the 2 that have filed claims. Why do you think there's a huge turnover? Why do you think that turnover happened?
Again, 2 left for personal family reasons. 3 were part of Glennis Vaughn's reorganization. If she hadn't left, she would probably have turned everybody in the office over. And then the last 3 resigned. The final one that resigned was our front office receptionist, the job that my scheduler filled for most of her time with us. But she wanted help, and she asked us if we, through Glennis Vaughn, my chief, would hire her babysitter. That's what Brittany Shaw's relationship was with Diane Porter. And she was the last person to resign, and she worked for about 50 days in our office.
We just have a few seconds left, but I want to ask you, I understand the DA's office has opened a criminal investigation into these allegations. Have you been questioned by them or asked to provide documentations?
I have not been questioned or asked. I know nothing about this, but I have asked the county, and I welcome an investigation because the truth will come out. There has been no inappropriate relationship, no misuse of government funds, and no political activities on government time.
And we'll have to end on this because people are asking, how are you able to be an effective supervisor with all of this going on?
I have been an effective supervisor despite this distraction. We're continuing to do the people's work, and I'm going to continue to do the people's work as long as I'm the 3rd District County Supervisor, which I believe will be for the next 5 years.
San Diego County Supervisor Dave Roberts, thank you for talking with us.
Now, we did reach out to the attorney for Roberts' former chief of staff, but she declined our request for an interview. We do have the claim posted on our website at kpbs.org. It's been 5 years since a Mexican man died after being beaten and shot with a taser by federal agents in San Ysidro. It was caught on video, and the death was ruled a homicide by the San Diego County Medical Examiner. KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero has this update.
Maria Puga's husband, Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, died after being shot with a taser by Border Patrol on May 28, 2010. Later, cell phone videos of the incident began to circulate, showing at least a dozen U.S. Border Patrol agents beating and repeatedly shooting Hernandez with a taser as he lies face down, handcuffed, and screaming for help. Hernandez had been deported after living in San Diego for 2 decades. He was trying to re-enter the U.S. to return home to his wife and 5 children when he was caught by the Border Patrol. Puga remembers the first time she saw his bruised and unresponsive body in the hospital.
Y yo pues le hablaba y le decía, levántate, mira esto a los niños, pero...
His brain had been starved of oxygen. The family took him off life support. Puga says it took time for the children to understand their father had died.
Lo duro estuvo a los que empezó a pasar el tiempo, o sea, como dices tú, ellos esperaban a su papá. Y mi papá le dije, su papá ya no va a regresar. Yo le decía, tu papá está en el cielo, mira.
Puga says the border agents killed her husband. The San Diego County medical examiner said the death was a homicide, but also said Hernandez had drugs in his system and had suffered a heart attack. No criminal charges have been filed.
No se ha hecho nada. Al igual las graves que pasan, no se ha hecho nada. Entonces, ¿dónde está la justicia? ¿Dónde está?
A federal grand jury investigation was opened in 2012 and is still pending. A separate civil lawsuit filed the year before has been repeatedly blocked from going to trial.
No me voy a quedar en mi casa sentada. No me voy a quedar ahí toda deprimida como al principio pues sí lo estuve.
The family's attorneys are waiting to see if a district court grants their motion to find the latest government appeal frivolous. Hernandez is one of 40 immigrants who died in incidents with U.S. Border Patrol agents in the past 5 years, according to the Southern Border Communities Coalition. The U.S. Department of Justice did not respond to requests for comment, and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection declined an interview. But the Border Patrol Union did agree to talk with KPBS.
This number of people have been killed because they have assaulted Border Patrol agents.
Union Vice President Sean Moran says border agents involved in the killings were just trying to defend themselves. He called the Border Patrol a model of restraint.
Border Patrol agents use lethal force 7 times less than the average law enforcement officer nationwide.
He says he would be shocked if the agents involved in the incident were indicted.
Border Patrol agents go out there wanting to do their job. They don't go out there wanting to send somebody to the morgue. That's just not the way it works, and any death is tragic. But this individual had a choice in this matter, and he chose to fight Border Patrol agents because for some reason he did not want to go back to Mexico.
Humberto Navarrete recorded one of the videos of the incident on his cell phone. He says he never saw Hernandez resisting.
He's face down, he's on the ground, and the agents are on top of him.
He stopped on his way to Tijuana because he heard a man crying in pain and begging for someone to save his life. Navarrete says he thinks his video is making some agents think twice before engaging in violence.
Because someone could be out there recording or watching.
But he says he often looks back on the incident and wishes he had had a better camera with him.
If I would have a more memory or battery in my device, probably I would something differently would be recorded that night.
For Puga, what's on the videos couldn't be any clearer.
De escuchar cómo gritaba, o sea, cómo puede ser posible que le hayan hecho eso.
Cristian Ramirez is Human Rights Director at Alliance San Diego. He says that Hernandez's case is emblematic of what he calls the historic brutality of the Border Patrol against migrants.
There will be an after and before history of the Border Patrol with this incident. Because in the past, when Border Patrol agents would kill Mexican Americans or Mexican immigrants, nobody will cover these issues. It was just the way things were.
He says there's already been progress. The CBP is conducting a feasibility study on body-worn cameras, and immigrant rights activists are meeting quarterly with the CBP commissioner.
Now I think that we are luckily in a place in which we could dialogue with CBP. But how do we tell folks like Maria to be patient?
On a recent Tuesday, Puga took a poster of her dead husband to the San Isidro border crossing, a few yards from the spot where he was beaten and shot with a taser.
Yo siempre he dicho a Anastasia, no voy a descansar hasta encontrar justicia. Yo se lo prometí, se lo he dicho. Como dice, si no hay justicia, no hay paz. O sea, entonces nosotros necesitamos la justicia para tener paz.
Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
Video journalists Nick McVicker and Katie Shulov helped produce that story. Fronteras reporting is made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. A team of nurses from Scripps Health is back in San Diego. They treated thousands of earthquake survivors in Nepal They also saw a second powerful earthquake. The aftermath of one. Peggy Pico talks with two nurses about relief and recovery efforts.
A 5-member medical team from Scripps Health traveled to Nepal. They treated more than 2,200 patients in a dozen or so remote villages and survived a second massive earthquake in the region. My guests, Scripps nurses Deborah McQuillan and Jan Zachary, were part of the team. And Deborah, your Scripps team actually worked with the International Medical Corps. How many patients did you see each day, and what kind of injuries did you treat?
We saw anywhere between maybe 60 to more specifically about 200 patients at some of the villages.
That's each day?
Each day, depending on how long we would run clinic in each of the villages that we visited. The injuries kind of spanned along the continuum from our first villages where we saw more traumatic injuries from the earthquake itself, lacerations, people who had been hit by stones, fractures, things of that nature. And as the weeks wore on, we still saw some of those, specifically from the rebuilding efforts, but we also started to see some more infections and primary care problems because the patients hadn't been seen by anybody during that time.
In a couple of weeks. Right. And Jan, do you have any specific cases of people you saw that sort of stand out for you?
I think there was one elderly gentleman who had a deep infected laceration, and when we had arrived at the clinic, he wasn't there, and later in the day he came and he needed significant treatment with antibiotic IV therapy as well as debriding the wound. And when the physician asked him, well, what took you away from not coming here earlier in the day, his response was, well, my animals, I needed to, and he pointed up to a mountain that he had traveled to for 4 hours to care for his buffalo, and said, my animals are far more important than any injury that I have.
And what about you, Deborah? Does any case stand out for you?
In one of the villages that we were in called Guayachek, there was a young man, about 36 years old, who had a double valve, heart valve replacement in the past couple of years, and that requires lifelong medication. Since he'd returned back to his village, he was running out of his meds, and he really had a discussion with us about making the choice of trekking for maybe 3 or 4 days and not knowing if he would get to the pharmacy because of the trails being out by landslide, or staying and helping his family rebuild his home and ensuring their safety. So that was very heart-wrenching to us, of course.
He made the trek and he survived?
He did not make the trek. We were able to coordinate a pharmacy drop for him that next day in the helicopter that came to pick us up to take us to the next village. And that was really very heartening for us as a medical team, as well as very important for him in his survival.
Now, you were both there when that second 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck. Jan, let me ask you this. How did it impact the villages and your ability to continue your mission there and treat people?
Well, the village people are so tired of the aftershocks, and there's such terror in their faces and their voices when there's an aftershock, but certainly when the actual quake happened. We heard screams throughout the villages. We saw dust from landslides and work that people had done on their homes. The stones began to crumble. So it was really evident that we would not be able to helicopter out that day, but we would stay in the village and provide more support.
Now, you visited more than 13 villages while you were in Nepal. Deborah, how did the people of Nepal receive you?
You know, the people of Nepal are amongst the most resilient and generous of spirit of any people I've ever met anywhere in the world. And I brought an example of some of the gifts that we were presented with. And these are typical prayer shawls from Nepal. And we received these from families and from hosts in recognition and in appreciation for our efforts for them there. So
even though they were suffering
even through their own devastation,
ordeal with hundreds of earthquakes and aftershocks afterwards continuing in Nepal, it's also heading into monsoons. Jan, what sort of aid do they still need there?
They're going to need long-term aid for many years to come, but from a short-term standpoint, the monsoon season is just weeks away, and most of the folks have had their seeds and grains that they have had under their homes buried, and they don't have access to food. So all of the international aid organizations are really working very fast and very hard to get enough adequate food and shelter for folks during a time of monsoons. They're still in tarps, and those tarps aren't going to be able to sustain the powerful rains that are coming their way.
And Deborah, we have to end on this, but after seeing these earthquakes and the aftermaths, do you think San Diego was prepared for a big earthquake?
I think we are prepared to an extent. What I don't think we're prepared for is the level of destruction and interruption in our basic infrastructures. I don't think we all recognize how difficult it's going to be for transportation to get the type of shelter and food and water that we may need during that acute period, and it's something that we all need to really look at more stringently in our own homes.
All right, Deborah McQuillan and registered nurse Jan Zachary, thank you both so much.
Thank you very much, Peggy.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, we profile the CEO of one of the nation's largest health insurers. That's Thursday on the PBS News Hour.
27 years ago, Mainly Mozart opened its first music festival in Balboa Park. Now it's hosting a series of concerts to celebrate the 2015 centennial. Mainly Mozart has invited 33 amateur musicians to perform with its orchestra in the Plaza de Panama June 14th. It's free to the public, and the festival's new music director, Michael Francis, says it's as much about life as it is music.
Mozart is so important because as a young man he had such a fantastic education in music, and we want to give that back as well. So the Mainly Mozart Youth Orchestra gives us that chance to help others really enjoy the music of Mozart, but equally learn so much about life through studying music.
5 more concerts will be performed beginning June 6th at the Balboa Theater. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.